Picture this, a chilling standoff in a deserted industrial zone, where the wind howls through shattered walls and flashlights dance across broken concrete. Colonel Evelyn Carter, a decorated U.S. Army hero, stands resolute behind an armored vehicle, her sharp eyes scanning a laser-marked map. Inside a crumbling building, an armed terrorist holds a pregnant woman hostage, her life hanging by a thread. Helicopters hum above, their blades slicing the tense night air, while radios crackle like a racing pulse. Carter's voice cuts through the chaos, steady and commanding. "No one fires? Wait for my signal." She adjusts her mic, steps toward the entrance, one hand raised to signal peace until a voice shatters the moment. "Hands up." Jack Brooke barks, his tone dripping with venom, as if he's cornering a fugitive. Sneering at her military ID, he spits. "You think some fake papers from the black market will fool me?" Still in her uniform, fresh from saving a life, Evelyn faces his gun and a single shot leaves her deaf. Her heroism mocked. Unbeknownst to Brooke, he's just fired on a national hero. In that split second, a question burns. When prejudice pulls the trigger, will you bow or stand tall and declare, "I'm not a criminal, it's just because I'm black"? Which city in the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any confrontation with an HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. Other dropped her holster to the ground. The air tightened in everyone's chest. As she entered the hallway, a harsh voice called out from inside, "One more step and I'll blow her up." Evelyn neither stopped nor hurried, but calmly replied, "I'm unarmed. I'm here to listen. You have the right to be heard." On the other side, a dry cough interrupted her, followed by the cocking sound of a gun being loaded. Inside the cramped room, flickering overhead lights cast shadows. The woman lay on her side, clutching her belly, blood seeping onto the floor. Evelyn looked directly at the gunman, her voice steady and low. "She is a mother. If you still have any fear of regret, let her live." He frowned, his hand trembling slightly. Noticing this, she took half a step forward without provoking or retreating. Opposite on the third floor, her teammates had approached through the shuttered window. A beam of strong light flashed directly into the terrorist's eyes. Startling him, Evelyn immediately turned, pressed close, grabbed his wrist, and kicked the gun away. The metallic clatter echoed as the remote-controlled bomb fell from his hand, rolling toward the wall. All movements took less than 2 seconds, but those were 2 seconds as long as a lifetime. As her teammates rushed in, the woman was carried away, still unconscious. Blood stained Evelyn's white shirt, soaking through the bulletproof vest and streaks. She turned her back and walked outside silently, wiping a scratch on her left cheek with her sleeve. Outside, medics were ready. Evelyn Donovan was placed on a stretcher, the flashing lights illuminating the empty courtyard brightly. Evelyn sat down on the concrete steps, breathing heavily. She removed her gloves, relaxing her hands that trembled with every breath. An officer approached silently, handing her a phone with the screen already on. On it, a highlighted message read, "Operation successful. Carter will be promoted tonight." Evelyn neither smiled nor nodded. She only looked down at her dust and blood-stained shoes, then closed her eyes softly. Inside her, glory had never been separate from its price. The military base lay, hidden behind tall pines, lights from lampposts reflecting on damp concrete, creating a cold atmosphere at night. Inside a small hall, fewer than 30 people gathered. Most were former comrades, some senior officers, and a silver-haired general holding a combination paper. Evelyn Carter stood up right among the seats, her uniform still unchanged, dust from the scene smeared on her sleeves and collar. She stepped onto the podium when invited, her confident footsteps echoing softly in the quiet space. Below, comrades applauded. A soft whistle came from the back rows before fading into the general's deep voice as he began reading the promotion announcement. Colonel Evelyn Carter for outstanding achievements in the citizen rescue operation, dedicated leadership spirit, and exceptional strategic situation assessment is officially recognized at the rank of 6-star colonel." The words flowed steadily, but Evelyn barely heard them. She stood still, eyes fixed on the closed wooden door at the back of the hall. In her mind, sounds from hours earlier echoed. The gunshots, the woman whispering her child's name, the pounding footsteps in the dark corridor. Those sounds connected to a more distant and persistent memory than any confrontation. A rainy night. She was 10 years old. Her mother was pinned to the sidewalk by police, simply mistaken for a black woman accused of stealing a wallet. Evelyn stood by the roadside, gripping her mother's shirt corner, watching her blood flow without knowing what to do. Every time fireworks exploded, she flinched because the sound was identical to bullets piercing flesh. A general's hand lightly patted her shoulder, pulling her back to the present. A small wooden box containing a medal was handed to her. Evelyn bowed to accept it, lips not quite smiling. Some took photos, others shook their hands. She nodded in response, but kept her eyes silent as if reading something deep inside herself. The ceremony ended quickly. Everyone left in groups of 3 or 2. Evelyn did not stay for the reception. He politely declined invitations to remain and headed straight to the parking lot. The moonless night wind blew through rows of gray brick buildings carrying the scent of earth. She sat in the driver's seat and set the navigation system to Ohio, where a quiet small house nestled among a wealthy neighborhood, the only home she had ever chosen with her own hands, without advisors or recommendations. On the highway, scattered cars drifted like ghosts. The screen on the right showed low traffic. In the distance, the western sky flashed bright lights, weekend fireworks, probably from some town festival. People laughed and talked, parting, holding hands on rooftops. They were all celebrating something. Evelyn glanced at the flashing lights outside the car window, then turned back to the control screen and turned the radio volume off completely. She did not know that as she passed the first checkpoint, her license plate data was scanned and mistakenly flagged. While she drove through dazzling lights somewhere within the sheriff's department internal radio system, an alert was broadcast, marking a person of color suspected unusual behavior, requires on-site inspection. Before dawn, the first bullet would fire and no fireworks could cover its sound. But now the SUV was still smoothly passing each road segment. The driver unaware that the world ahead was poised to turn in a different direction, not because of her mistake, but because of the dangerous habit of those who think the law is a privilege only for themselves. The federal highway lying between two suburban counties in Ohio was unusually quiet. Fireworks from the distant town still erupted in bursts, tinting the sky purple beyond the windshield. Evelyn adjusted the steering wheel, occasionally glancing at the navigation screen. Everything was still on course. The car moved steadily, at the speed limit. No music, no cabin lights, only the sound of tires gliding evenly over the asphalt, still warm from the day's heat. She began to feel stiffness in her neck and shoulders, intending to stop at the next gas station when flashing red lights appeared behind her, accompanied by a short siren blast. A police car overtook her, then slowed down and pulled close in front. Evelyn exhaled, steered to the right shoulder, engaged the handbrake, and switched off the high beams, keeping the engine running. The police car's door open. Two men stepped out, flashlights shining directly into the cabin. Evelyn squinted, lowered the window, and placed her hands on the steering wheel. She clearly saw the badge on the left chest, Donovan, and the other man, Brooke. Jack Brooke approached the front of the car, stopped close to the driver's door, neither nodding nor lowering his voice. The flashlight beam shone straight into her face. "Hands on your head." "Get out of the car." Evelyn frowned slightly, but kept her tone calm. "What have I violated?" James Donovan stood farther back, hand resting lightly on his holster, eyes lingering on the rear trunk. He didn't look long, but long enough for Evelyn to feel the suspicion was more prejudice than protocol. Jack shouted again, this time more harshly, "We're doing random checks. You dress like this, drive like this at night on this road. There's a problem." Evelyn opened the door and stepped out. She raised her hands high, turned sideways so the flashlight could fully illuminate her face and posture. She didn't reach for her wallet or documents, speaking slowly. I am from the Pentagon. There are military ID papers, federal passes, and mission files in the car. You can check directly. Jack gave no response. He narrowed his eyes, glanced over Evelyn, then stepped back a few paces, raised his radio to his mouth, and pressed the button as if calling for backup. James looked at his partner disapprovingly, but stood still, not intervening. Evelyn remained standing. The night wind began to pick up, carrying the scent of gasoline from a fence several dozen meters away. In the distance, fireworks continued to explode cheerfully, almost mockingly at the scene unfolding. Jack spoke something quickly into the radio, eyes never leaving Evelyn. His voice was decisive, tore, and did not mention the reason for stopping the vehicle. Evelyn recognized that look. It was no longer observation, but control. She took a breath, balanced on her dust-covered flat shoes worn all day. Though the weather was not cold, her spine tensed slightly. Her instincts told her this was beyond any professional protocol. What was happening was not in any manual for highway stop procedures. Another engine sound came from behind. A second police car arrived, headlights illuminating the entire stretch of road. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder, the light casting a long shadow of her figure on the asphalt. James shifted slightly to the right as if avoiding glances, but actually to stay closer to his weapon. She lowered her head to check her watch. Minutes passed, neither fast nor slow, but felt like heavy stones pressing on her chest. Suddenly, an old phrase echoed in her mind from internal files about arbitrary stops when law enforcers began appointing themselves as judges. Procedures become untrustworthy. Evelyn did nothing further and said no more. She stood still, hands relaxed, at her sides, as if waiting for something. Not a permit, but the truth to be revealed. But truth never comes before guns are drawn too easily. Jack stepped closer. Heavy footsteps striking the pavement like a final warning. Just over an arm's length from Evelyn, he tilted his head, squinted, then shouted, "Hands on the car, turn." Around now, Evelyn remained unmoved, eyes locked on the face glowing with challenge. Her voice was slow and steady. "Before a body search, I have the right to know the reason." The atmosphere tightened. James stood to the side, exhaling sharply. Jack leaned forward, face tight, voice clipped word by word. "I said, no arguing. This is a white neighborhood. You have no right to speak." James flinched slightly. He looked at Evelyn again. Light from the car behind cast through the passenger window. A military uniform was folded carefully on the seat, next to a helmet with a rank insignia. Hanging from the rear view mirror was a copy of a military ID card. Serial number, badge, and name, Carter, Evelyn. James turned to Jack. His eyes showed unease, but before he could speak, Jack stepped right up to Evelyn. With a brusque motion, he drew his gun and pressed it against her hip, his voice cold as steel. Resisting an officer, Evelyn did not flinch. Both hands raised higher, eyes unwavering. Her voice was low and firm. "You are exceeding your authority. I am a United States Army Colonel. All your actions are being tracked, recorded, and will be reported." Jack took a half step back and laughed harshly. The rough laugh pierced the night like the rusty sound of a broken machine. "I don't care if you're a colonel or trash," he said, staring at Evelyn's chest. "Here, power belongs to whoever fires first." James stepped forward, raising his hand. "Jack, let me handle this." Jack brushed James's hand away like swatting a bug. His face darkened. At that moment, Evelyn knew she was facing not just a rogue individual, but a system that enabled him to act as judge. The law here no longer belonged to courts or codes of conduct, but was twisted by a finger already poised on the trigger. Evelyn lowered her hands slowly, reached into her jacket pocket, and pulled out a black leather wallet. Inside were a military identification, a Department of Defense embossed pass, and a copy of her orders. She did not look at Jack or hand it over directly. Instead, she took a half step forward, opened the wallet, and held it out in front of her. Jack ignored it. He raised his hand forcefully, knocking the wallet to the ground. Papers slid out, scattering near the wheels. The police car's light shone directly on the shimmering Department of Defense logo beneath the laminated plastic. Evelyn bent to pick up a paper, but not too quickly. She looked down at the road, then up. Her eyes changed colder, deeper, seeming detached from the context. No longer the defense of someone experienced, but the gaze of one who knew she was about to stand in the eye of a storm. Jack stepped back several paces, raised his radio, and muttered a few short phrases. James remained still, his hands loosely clenched, eyes shining with worry, not for fear the situation would escalate, but because he understood this moment, even if lasting only a few minutes, could break a life if someone fired. Evelyn did not pick up her wallet again. She stood straight, chest rising and falling lightly with restrained breaths. On that empty highway between flickering light and surrounding darkness, her identity was treated as a joke. Deep inside, she sensed what was coming was no longer about right or wrong. It was an event, a turning point, an explosion without gunpowder. On the deserted road, the flashing lights from the patrol car swept across Evelyn's face, cutting it into harsh patches of light. Jack's gun was fully exposed at his side as he stepped forward, his hand resting on the grip as if ready to draw. At any moment, his breath was heavy, and the sound of his shoes scraping the asphalt cracked sharply in the cold night. James stood slightly behind, raising his hand as if to speak, but Jack gave him no chance. A sharp glance from Jack served as a reminder that control of the situation belonged not to reason, but to whoever dared to act faster. Evelyn kept both hands raised to shoulder height, palms open and facing forward. Her gaze remained fixed between the two men, neither defiant nor submissive. When Jack's voice hardened again, Evelyn slowly opened her mouth. She clearly stated her name, rank, and unit. Then she pulled out her military ID card from her inner pocket. Next to it was a deployment order specifying the reason for nighttime travel on the interstate. She spoke evenly, each word clear, requesting vehicle inspection and providing a database access code to verify her military identity. She did not plead. She was following proper procedure, acting according to the law and knowing her rights. But Jack paid no attention to the papers. He sneered, lifting the card and dropping it like trash. Military papers, those are forged all over the black market. His voice was laced with venom. You might fool fools, but you won't fool me. His face darkened as he stepped closer. Contempt filled his eyes. Evelyn's words carried no weight for him. In his mind, she was neither a military officer nor a citizen, entitled to protection. To him, she was just a black woman standing where she didn't belong. James stood still, but his eyes betrayed confusion. When Evelyn half turned to pick up the papers she had dropped, he clearly saw the 6-star insignia on her shoulder, something that could not be faked. He stepped forward quickly, intending to verify, but Jack waved him off. No need, he growled. Each word, "You're softening up." The phrase was not loud, but it hit James like a slap, forcing him back. The internal struggle showed on his young face. The wind blew across Evelyn's shoulder, stirring her coat lightly. She did not react to the insult, nor change expression at the accusation. Her gaze was calm, like still water, yet so deep it made Jack uneasy. Evelyn looked up, facing the man holding the gun, not with fear, but full of disgust. "The problem isn't that you don't believe me. The problem is you refuse to believe any black person standing tall in front of you." The words rose slowly. For a moment, the wind stopped, and the flashing lights seemed frozen. Evelyn did not shrug or bow her head. She stood straight, hands still open on the border between reason and prejudice. Then, what broke was not from anyone's mouth, but from a growing crack inside a system that always stayed silent before it shot. As soon as her voice ended, Jack drew his gun. His movement was so decisive that James could not stop him. Evelyn's arm had not yet lowered when the sharp shot tore through the air, spreading through the empty cold space of the interstate. A streak of red light flashed past her head like a slap from prejudice, from the blind fear of one claiming to maintain order. The bullet grazed past her ear bones, spraying blood in a long streak, staining the left shoulder of her uniform red. Evelyn collapsed, her head striking the rear of a vehicle. Her body curled reflexively, then went limp on the cold asphalt. She did not cry out nor raise a hand. Every movement dissolved like the badge still pinned to her chest, now smeared and soaked. Blood from the wound spread into a red pool, seeping into the asphalt cracks, settling in the road grooves. James stood frozen, mouth open in silence before his anger burst into a yell. "What the hell are you doing?" He stepped toward Jack, eyes wide with horror. Jack remained still, gun still pointed at Evelyn, his mouth tight as if justifying an act that had crossed the line. He answered in a steady voice, like reading a report. She was about to react. "I had to act first," James shouted, his voice low, but breaking from long-held tension. She didn't move. She was cooperating. The words shattered every layer Jack had built around himself. Between them appeared a line thin as the car's headlights, but impossible to erase. The stop had become a shooting incident, without orders, without verification, without any reasonable reason recorded in the file. In the distance, headlights from a private car approached. The driver, a middle-aged man, stopped immediately upon seeing the scene. He leaned through the window, calling out loudly, "Do you need an ambulance?" James signaled immediately, his foot planted beside Evelyn's bleeding body. The man pulled out his phone and dialed. The dashboard camera recorded everything that had just happened, unaware it would become vivid evidence hours later. Another car turned from afar, its lights dimmed through the thin mist. The driver was Dr. Liam, just finishing a tenth shift. He stopped when he saw the small crowd on the road. Getting out, Liam immediately recognized the woman lying in blood. That face, that name tag, he remembered all too well. Without a word, Liam knelt beside Evelyn, took a cloth from his pocket to staunch the bleeding temporarily. At the same time, he activated the recording app with a gesture on his watch. His finger swiped gently on his left wrist. The record icon turned red. Every word, action, expression was recorded. He did not know who fired the shot, nor did he need to. He only knew he stood before someone who did not deserve to lie in the road like that. Evelyn remained still, eyes half closed, brows slightly furrowed as if holding onto something left unsaid. Her hand still clutched a small item in her palm. The blood-stained military ID, a solid piece of plastic amid the storm of prejudice. The patrol car's light reflected off the U.S. Army badge on her shoulder, sparkling like a truth shot down, but not yet vanished. On the road surface, the bullet lay somewhere, scattered among drops of blood and broken glass shards. It had no order to fire, but precisely because of that, it would become the start of days when the system must answer. The bullet needed no orders, but justice could no longer remain silent. The drizzle fell faintly under the pale white headlights, forming a thin mist along the empty highway. Evelyn lay on her side, one cheek pressed against the rough pavement, blood from her ear seeping into the cold asphalt. Her dark uniform was torn at the shoulder, her arm curled protectively as if shielding herself. James knelt beside her, his hand trembling as he pressed the emergency call button, his lips stammering her name in desperation. Jack stood well back, still holding his gun, his eyes scanning cautiously as if watching for unexpected witnesses. His lips pressed tight, shoulders raised like someone awaiting justification. The sound of brakes came from nearby. Liam, a surgeon, just off duty, stopped his car when he saw the scene ahead. From afar, he clearly saw a woman lying in the road, her uniform striking his heart into stillness. He opened the door and rushed forward without fastening his white coat. No one stopped him. James stepped back upon seeing the man with a hospital badge approaching. Liam knelt beside Evelyn, pressing quickly on her carotid artery while checking her pupils. One eyelid fluttered slightly, a fragile sign of life. Blood continuously oozed through his gloves. He grabbed a piece of cloth from his coat pocket and pressed it against the wound near her ear. His gaze shifted to James, then Jack, his voice firm. "What happened here?" James stammered something about her not following orders and suspicious movements. Jack stood silent, eyes staring into the empty space behind Liam's head. The doctor glanced at the radio, then at the body camera attached to James's chest, completely off. The expressions of the two officers made him wary. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Liam pulled his phone from his back pocket, opened the camera, and began recording. His voice was steady as he panned. Scene at Route 19 westbound. A woman in uniform was hot, bleeding from the neck and ear. Victim still breathing. He lowered the camera close to Evelyn, then pointed it at the two officers stepping back, capturing clearly the stark contrast, Jack's cold eyes and James's confused, pale face, a silent cut between two extremes. The sound of an ambulance siren grew nearer by the second. Liam kept steady pressure on the wound. He knew there was not enough time to fully stop the bleeding, but enough to keep her alive until help arrived. The girl beneath his hands was fighting. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on the sky without blinking, as if seeing something beyond physical reality. Liam looked back at Evelyn one last time before the ambulance arrived. Blood still flowed steadily, but his hand never left the wound. In that moment, he no longer saw a victim, he saw a silence forcibly imposed, a body condemned more by prejudice than by action. A military officer was shot by the very people meant to protect her. He tightened the strap of his coat pocket, eyes pressed behind his glasses. The clip was saved, evidence secured, and within Liam, a decision formed. He would not let this be buried. This was no accident, no procedural error. This was a crime, and this time he would testify to it. A stretcher was quickly rolled into the ambulance. Ives and blood bags were attached hastily while she still breathed faintly, each breath breaking with chest spasms. James stood frozen, unable to answer the basic questions of the paramedics: name, condition, and cause of injury. Liam climbed into the ambulance, nodding briefly to the lead doctor. He kept his hand firmly on Evelyn's neck, pressing the fresh bandage. His voice was low, but resolute. "She is a military officer. She must live." On the way to the hospital, all procedures were carried out in tense silence. Every time he glanced at Evelyn's struggling chest, Liam pressed harder on the wound. The smell of blood was familiar, but different this time. He felt life being violently pulled away from this woman as a punishment, and he understood this bullet wound was not simply the result of a moment's recklessness. When the ambulance reached the emergency entrance, the medical team was ready. A nurse took Evelyn's wallet from her coat to check her identity. A glance at the ID card and the Department of Defense stamped orders made her pause. Everyone present understood this case was more than medical. It was political. It was an honor. And another emergency. Protecting a symbol, Liam quickly exchanged information, recommending the activation of the priority surgical team while insisting on patient confidentiality. All access must be approved by federal authorities. His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. The shift leader nodded, sending the call for the main surgical team. Meanwhile, waiting in the support area, Liam opened his phone and replayed a news clip from a few weeks earlier. He vaguely remembered a woman who appeared on national television speaking about a hostage rescue mission involving a pregnant woman. As the video played, the image of Evelyn Carter in uniform sitting in a press room appeared clearly. She was honored for her brave actions in a life-or-death situation. The woman whose life he was now trying to save had once saved James Donovan's wife. Liam's heart sank, his initial anger turning into something heavier. Heartbreak, a person who had saved another's life. who had put herself before violence, was shot at home by those entrusted to protect the community. No one shot a criminal, they shot someone who represented the highest courage and dignity of this country. Before leaving the hospital, Liam extracted the crime scene footage onto 2 separate devices. One encrypted copy was sent directly to the Department of Defense contact, and the other was handed over to the hospital records unit. He needed no permission to do what was right. He did not wait for consensus to protect the truth. Liam instructed the head nurse, "If the police return, do not allow access without military presence." The nurse answered briefly, "Understood." As he stepped into the hallway, the ceiling light stretched into a faint trail at the end of the corridor. The door to the room where Evelyn was being treated stood slightly ajar. Liam stood still for a moment, gripping his phone tightly. The screen still showed the file name Incident Route 19PPP4. Inside him, the question arose not from doubt, but shock. If the one who saves another's life can be shot, what justice remains to stand firm? At the Federal Security Coordination Center, located inside the Pentagon, an urgent alarm sounded in the quiet midst of a work session. The security assistant on duty glanced up at the screen, momentarily startled to see the identification code clearly displayed, Grit Carter 6. This was the signal sent from the biological device implanted in Colonel Evelyn Carter's body. Current data showed a sudden drop in heart rate and a steep decline in blood pressure, with her location fixed on a section of the Northern Ohio Federal Highway. The red alert immediately escalated to the highest priority and special classification. Within minutes, a special task force from the Military Security Agency was ordered to deploy. They arrived at the scene by helicopter, coordinating with local military police forces. The command unit did not communicate through civilian authorities, but opened an independent channel with the county police station based on regulations protecting high-ranking officers in cases of injury with undetermined cause. Evelyn Carter's active status as a colonel triggered the case's immediate classification as a gray zone with federal intrusion risk. When the team reached the hospital, they were informed that the victim had passed the critical stage, but had not yet fully regained consciousness. Liam, the doctor who performed the emergency treatment, was the first to be contacted. He presented medical records and offered cooperation, while officers assigned a technical team to extract data from the biological device and auxiliary cameras in the emergency area. Meanwhile, another team moved to the Beverly Hill Police Station to summon Officer Jack Brooke, who was directly involved in the shooting incident. Jack was taken to a nearby military facility and interrogated in a private room with official records. He appeared confused being summoned under Pentagon orders, but tried to stay calm. Sitting before military officers, his expression gradually shifted from disdain to caution. He insisted that the shooting was an act of self-defense. The target made unusual movements. I wasn't sure what they were, but I reacted to preserve the lives of both officers on the scene. However, when asked to provide footage from his body camera, Jack claimed the device was disabled due to a signal failure. The patrol car's camera also did not capture clear images because it was improperly angled. None of the investigating officers rushed to conclusions. They quietly took notes, cross-checked details, and maintained formal language, but their eyes were filled with scrutiny. Jack understood this. He knew they did not believe him, but they lacked sufficient grounds to detain him longer. After 2 hours of interrogation, Jack was released from the detention area under the condition of cooperating in subsequent hearings. He stepped out with a hardened face, eyes darting nervously, his gait no longer confident like at the police station. A few meters away, a young plainclothes military officer leaned against the wall with arms crossed. When Jack's gaze passed him, the officer remained still, eyes unblinking. The moment was brief, but sent a chill down Jack's spine. It was an unusual alertness, as if the man knew every wrong step Jack was trying to hide. Outside, the sky was turning toward evening. Jack opened his car door, lit a cigarette, and exhaled a long breath. The familiar phrase echoed in his mind, They won't do anything without video evidence. He told himself this, but his hands trembled slightly as he inserted the key into the ignition. An undefined fear crept in. For the first time, he realized. The force he faced was no longer a woman shot on the highway, but an entire system standing silently precisely behind her. Jack left the military facility with heavy steps. The feeling of being released did not bring the relief he had hoped. Instead, his heart beat irregularly, hands were sweaty. He got into his car, locked the doors quickly, scanning both sides through the rearview mirror. The streets showed no unusual signs, but every shadow seemed to watch him. He pulled out his phone and opened the news section. A local paper mentioned an armed confrontation between police and a suspicious driver, avoiding any names. He sighed briefly, but could not extinguish the unease inside. Meanwhile, across town, a closed meeting was held in the Pentagon Strategy Room. National Defense Security advisors and representatives from the Department of Justice sat around the table. Evelyn's case files were updated hourly, with the most critical part being the personal recording devices embedded in her uniform. A special cybersecurity team was ordered to restore all data. They extracted everything from location signals, collision sensors to hidden cameras inside the breast badge, a security technology typically used in emergency missions. Every frame and sound was analyzed to cross-check Jack's testimony. Dr. Liam was summoned as a witness. He gave clear statements and provided footage from his personal phone. The video recorded Evelyn lying on the road, blood flowing from her ear with Jack standing nearby, gun still drawn. There was no threatening behavior from her side. This was the first crucial piece, but insufficient for prosecution. Therefore, the investigation team decided to take a deeper covert step. In a nearby town, a man in his 40s wearing a plaid shirt and a baseball cap entered a dilapidated roadside bar. He was a former Army Intelligence Unit veteran now working for the Department of Defense's Secret Investigation Team. His mission was simple: to monitor Jack Brooke. No big drama, no direct contact, only collecting and listening. Through some casual inquiries, he found one of Jack's old friends. Over beers and cigarettes, the past gradually unfolded. Jack had been reprimanded for using violence against suspects, but the records were never escalated to the state level. A deputy station chief had handled it internally. At the same time, within internal military forums, Evelyn's story began to spread. Initially, a retired lieutenant posted, "If a colonel can be shot while in uniform, who is truly safe?" Veterans who served with Evelyn shared old photos, anonymous posts, and calls for justice. The military community's atmosphere buzzed with tension. An internal encrypted bulletin sent to the highest levels of the Department of Defense appeared on control screens. It showed Evelyn lying on a hospital bed, eyes closed, a white bandage wrapped around her head, enveloped in complete silence. At the screen's corner, a slow, cold, but resolute caption ran, "This case does not end with a report. It is the beginning of a purge." In the dimly lit command room, the investigation had said nothing. He stared at the image, silently, understanding that Evelyn's silence was not an end, but a prologue to an earthquake. This time it would shake not just a police station, but an entire system once thought untouchable. The scent of blood mixed with the heavy smell of disinfectant filled the air between two emergency rooms facing each other. In one, under bright surgical lights, 3 doctors and 2 nurses fought to stop the bleeding on the left side of a woman's head clad in a military uniform. Her U.S. Army badge was stained and stuck to torn fabric. Her pulse was weak and irregular, blood seeping through a temporary bandage. Before stabilization, she convulsed lightly, eyes tightly shut, eyebrows furrowed as if wrestling with life itself. Not far away, another room echoed with the sounds of fetal monitors and urgent commands. Emily Donovan's face was pale, hands gripping the sheet tightly amid early labor, broken water, heavy bleeding, and a weak fetus, admitted after a panic episode caused by trauma. Her body and mind remained fragile. Facing a critical moment, James received the news while finishing a report. Blood stains from the earlier confrontation marked his sleeve. Without washing, he hurried to his car, footsteps echoing like someone fleeing one nightmare only to enter another. The hospital was a maze, but James was taken directly to surgery upon reporting as family. The chief surgeon shook his head, describing a complex case with a weak fetus and irregular contractions. Doctors hesitated, some inexperienced, with trauma-induced births. They suggested calling the military medical advisor involved in Emily's rescue. A doctor just stabilized after a highway shooting. That doctor was Evelyn Carter. When James reached the waiting room, a nurse handed him Emily's medical records with a note. First responder and initial treatment, Colonel Evelyn Carter, special military medic. His vision blurred and throat tightened as he stared at her name, the woman wounded by his teammate's bullet, who had saved his wife. Leaning against the wall that seemed to tremble, he faltered down the corridor separating the rooms. On one side, Emily fought for life under beeping devices and rushing doctors. On the other hand, Evelyn lay motionless, head bandaged, a silent testament to what the system had rejected. James pressed his hand to the glass, feeling a coldness transfer to his palm. His fingers trembled slightly, unsure if from the cold or the overwhelming truth. Two surgeries were underway, each a lifeline, and he stood between them, uncertain which faith would endure the long night ahead. Sitting on a bench, his mind replayed fragmented, illogical images. Evelyn's calm gaze before the gun, Emily's wheeled entry, the gun sounding like hasty judgment. Why was Evelyn there during Emily's capture? Why was a high-ranking soldier mistrusted by the system and by James himself, who considered himself the law? These questions weren't in manuals, but buried beneath layers of persistent prejudice. Footsteps echoed steadily as Liam passed by, locking eyes with James briefly, not with anger, but recognition of what had occurred. James approached and asked, softly, "Who is she really?" Liam said nothing, but handed him a folded paper with Evelyn Carter's name, rank, and official Department of Defense seal and signature in medical records. Clutching it, James felt he held a piece of ignored truth. Later, a hospital technician showed James video footage from before the shooting. Evelyn raised both hands, empty eyes on James, just before the gunshot. No threat, only unformed woman trying to avoid being swallowed by armed misunderstanding. James rewound the clip repeatedly, each replay shattering his mental image. He then entered Emily's post-operative room, where she lay pale but regaining strength. She grasped his hand and whispered, "Who saved me back then?" Frozen, James squeezed her hand and replied truthfully, "Someone I thought was a threat." That night, alone in his car, James tore through his old report, crossing out excuses and writing anew with regret. "I was wrong." And that wrong was paid. For with innocent blood, under the street light, James was no longer a young officer controlling situations, but a man who had lost his measure of justice and had to relearn from a wound never fully healed. James sat in the white-walled room designated for internal investigation coordination officers, holding a pen, but unable to write a single word. His hollow eyes were fixed on the paper before him, where the first line had already been printed, "Incident report on Route 19. Those words felt like a cold, indifferent command. Yet what weighed heavily on his hand was not the pressure of procedure, but the image of a woman in uniform collapsing onto the pavement, blood spreading from her ear like a red ink blot in the night. Evelyn Carter. That face appeared every time he closed his eyes, every time he tried to dismiss it with logic, telling himself, "This is just duty." Jack sat opposite, arms crossed, eyes never leaving the phone in his hand. He looked up at James with a low, confident voice, cold in tone. "Just write that she disobeyed orders. Everything will pass, they will believe you." Then he smiled slightly, crossing his legs as if everything had been planned. James nodded lightly, but his hand still could not bring the pen down. His index finger trembled slightly, not out of fear, but instinctive refusal, The phone rang inside his shirt pocket, cutting through his thoughts. It was Emily, his wife. Her voice was weak, but warm through the speaker. "I just woke up. They said the premature birth isn't dangerous. Both the baby and I are okay." A soft breath escaped James's chest. He asked if she needed anything. She replied, "I just want to know one thing. Do you know anything about the female officer who saved me that day? The one who negotiated with the terrorist?" James suddenly froze. "What's her name?" Emily answered immediately, "Colonel Evelyn Carter." Those words fell like a stone into a well. James opened the folder on the table, flipping through a stack of documents, stomping at a paper listing the injured person's name. Evelyn Carter. The pen slipped from his hand. His entire body slumped in the chair. He stared into the empty space ahead, sweat beading on his forehead. Fragments of memory surged back. Calm eyes measured speech. Cooperative gestures until the very end. Evelyn had never resisted. She only requested the proper procedure. She did not shout, did not run, did not fight back. Yet, she was shot, and he standing nearby had not spoken up. Jack sent a message. "The superiors have finalized the plan. This must not leak out. Don't say anything more." James locked his screen and threw the phone aside. The unspoken question choked his throat. "If she's the one who saved my wife, then what am I in this? A traitor, an accomplice, or a coward for choosing silent?" A new file was pushed before him. Inside was a pre-written statement, waiting only for his signature. He skimmed through it. Each sentence was fabricated language. The suspect showed signs of threatening officers, disobeyed stop orders. Each word stabbed at his memory. James quietly pushed the draft aside, placing a blank sheet on the table. He sat silently for hours, pen resting without writing a single line. For the first time since wearing the uniform, he felt himself outside the ranks he once trusted. No voice from Jack, no pressure from the system, only his conscience bleeding silently, like the woman left behind by the bullet fired by his comrade. And he had aided it, not daring to act. Yet James was certain of one thing. He could no longer follow orders that his heart no longer believed were right. That was the first time he chose silence to resist. And also, when he understood that silence could start a new path, James stayed awake all night in the quiet apartment. All street sounds were blocked by the closed door, but inside his mind, gunshots echoed like an unending after-round. He opened his laptop, typed into the search box, "Colonel Evelyn Carter." A series of articles appeared, prominent headlines, familiar images, footage from the press conference after the hostage rescue operation in suburban Virginia. Evelyn stood before a row of microphones, her voice low and calm, recounting every negotiation step, how she distracted the terrorist to bring a laboring woman to safety. That woman was Emmy, his wife. James stared at the frame. That figure, that face is unmistakable. Evelyn had been honored as the first to improve crisis negotiation procedures for the Rapid Response Force, an officer who had survived dozens of life or METHI missions, respected by both the military and the community. Yet in the files being rewritten, she was described as a suspect exhibiting disruptive behavior. He closed the laptop, his heart heavy. Recalling that night, James remembered when Jack silently reached to turn off the chest mount camera. He hadn't thought much then, but now everything was clear. Jack's yelling, Evelyn's surprised eyes without resistance, all reflected one thing. Her fear was not of arrest, but of knowing the system she once protected was cracking from within. Pressure mounted when the superior called James up, demanding that he complete his testimony within 3 hours. The commander's words sounded like a cold order. Finalize the testimony as soon as possible to control public opinion. James stood silently, eyes lowered to the desk. The draft statement was ready, waiting for a signature. Signing it meant retaining rank, reputation, even praise for proper procedure. But refusing would turn everything down another path. Just as he left the office, James' phone rang. It was Emily, She sent a short clip with a message. "You need to see this." He opened it. The video was from Emily's personal angle. The moment a terrorist pressed a gun to her. At that instant, Evelyn rushed from behind, spreading her arms to shield Emily's abdomen. A scream, a gunshot. James clearly saw Evelyn shielding herself with her own body. The video ended with her pulling Emily out of the hallway, her hands still bleeding. He dropped the phone, hands covering his face. Waves of guilt surged. Evelyn was not just an officer, not just a rank. She was the one who used her own body to keep his wife from death. And he, the man who once swore to uphold justice, had been silent before the bullet fired less than a meter away. That night, James quietly left home without a name tag or uniform. He filled out an internal patient visit form at the military medical reception, writing the correct name, Evelyn Carter. The medical staff nodded slightly, asking no questions. He walked to the recovery room door and stood outside. A thin yellow beam of light spilled from inside, stretching over the police shoes he was wearing. The last time, he did not knock or expect her to see him. He just stood there, eyes looking through the frosted glass, chest heavy. His hand trembled lightly on the door before withdrawing. Inside, he whispered one sentence, "I owe you the truth." And perhaps that was the first time James Donovan began to hear the voice of his own conscience. Evelyn opened her eyes under the soft white light of the ceiling lamp for the first time, without dizziness or confusion. She was alert to a chilling degree. The familiar presence of nurses checking her pulse and doctors taking notes remained, but everything seemed to happen behind a thick, impenetrable glass. She saw them speaking, hands pointing to the monitor screen. Faces thoughtful and worried, then turning cautious. A small piece of paper was placed in her hand. The words were clear, concise, without any unnecessary lines. Permanent hearing loss, both ears, no recovery. She read it over and over. No sound echoed in her mind, no reverberation, only heavy silence. The emotion did not come immediately as one might expect. She looked down at her hand, her pinky still bearing a small bruise from the IV line, dry skin, nails unevenly trimmed. She folded the paper and put it aside. Her eyes did not shed tears. No cries broke out. She had witnessed her soldiers lose arms, legs, and memories. Now it was hearing. This battle was hers alone. People around moved and exchanged, their actions still smooth. But to Evelyn, all were silent images. She noticed slow nods, hesitant eyes, hands lightly placed on her shoulder as if sympathy could compensate for something. She hated that look. It was both the kindest and cruelest because it assumed the person before them had become a complete victim. When the medical specialist suggested implanting a central neural device to stimulate sound waves, Evelyn shook her head. A consent form was handed over and she wrote, "I need silence. I need to know that I must fight under the rawest conditions." This was not a rejection of medicine, but a deliberate choice. She did not want to veil this loss with technology. She needed it as living proof for the battle ahead. A few hours later, she requested contact with the military assistant office. A man in a dark suit entered carrying a tablet. Evelyn gestured for paper and pen and wrote, "Transfer personal file to active temporary leave status for special reasons. No discharge allowed." The assistant hesitated briefly, but finally nodded. Evelyn reviewed the entire case file herself, from the scene report to internal feedback. Every page was turned by patient hands, eyes silently absorbing faint details. As if investigating her own case, that evening, she requested a change of the nameplate by her bedside. An elderly nurse approached, mouthing the question, "What do you want to say?" Evelyn typed a few lines on an electronic device and quietly handed it over. Evelyn sat upright on the hospital bed, a tablet on her lap, eyes moving rhythmically across the screen. Each blink acted as a cursor shifting to a character, and each slight glance completed a punctuation mark. The eye-tracking software pre-installed had now become the only communication tool between her and the world. No one in the room had to Wait for her to type. Evelyn's eye movements were even faster than many typing with their hands. Every word appeared neat, precise, and firm. There was no sound, but each message carried the weight of a command. 3 military officers entered the room. They came authorized by the Strategic Coordination Agency, carrying forms and support plans. 2 of them looked slightly confused, seeing Evelyn's lack of verbal response. The third, a lieutenant colonel, hesitated and asked, "Do you need a sign language interpreter?" Evelyn pointed to the screen and the words appeared. "I lost hearing, not thought." A pause followed, then all 3 understood. This was not a courtesy visit, but a true operational meeting until Professor Kaw or Walker. Evelyn requested access to all files related to the case, cross-records, internal reports, and times of signal interruption from police car cameras. She ordered a comparison of this data with her personal location data, something impossible to fake due to permanent encryption in the military system. That same afternoon, she sent an internal email to the military lawyer who had worked with her during the Helmand campaign, a middle-aged man who helped her handle local disputes. The letter was short, but complete with every timestamp and event needing legal review. She did not use the victim label, but the concept of the party wrongly attacked under special circumstances. When the technical department transferred copies of internal police radio data, Evelyn spent hours reviewing each file. Using VoiceStoke software, she detected an anomaly, a segment where James' voice, still inexperienced, ordered a temporary halt intervention to verify identity. Then the system recorded a cut signal. The gap lasted 3 minutes, and in that interval the shot was fired. No one mentioned Jack. No order to shoot existed. All that silence became the clearest evidence. Evelyn noted the timestamps, highlighted the ignored command line, and sent it to the legal team preparing the complaint. A kind of reverse defense line began to form. She did not react with anger, but with systematization. She turned her silence into a weapon, exposing all obscured parts. She said nothing, but forced related units to open reports. Layer by layer, night fell. Evelyn went to the restroom, stood before the mirror. Her face was thinner than before, hair still unkempt, but the spirit in her eyes remained unchanged. She opened her tablet, typed each word. Every word that appeared was a step forward in reclaiming her voice in the deepest sense. The screen lit the silent space, displaying the final line of the day: "I do not need to speak. By action, I will make them listen to each piece of evidence." He put the device down, stared straight at herself as if facing the first defeated adversary. Silence. From now on, silence would no longer be acceptance, but a mode of combat. Early morning light filtered palely through the glass window into the hospital room on the 4th floor. A nurse had just changed the IV bag and was adjusting the needle while checking blood pressure when she turned sharply. Surprised, Evelyn had sat up at some point, leaning against the pillow with wide open eyes, unusually alert. No one expected a patient recovering from a traumatic brain injury to move so quickly. Evelyn neither asked nor waited for permission. She reached for the electronic board beside the bed and typed a message. "I need to contact the Department of Defense." The nurse looked confused and stepped back, glancing around for a doctor. Another nurse nearby read the message and shook her head, saying, "She might not be stable. Post-operative states can cause hallucinations." The on-duty doctor arrived, examined her pupils and heart rate. But before he could ask more, Evelyn lowered the board and picked up a small, sleek black device, her personal electronic aid with a biometric scanner. She pressed her forehead against it and sat up straight, gripping it like a weapon. The screen lit up, revealing an unfamiliar interface, filled with flickering coded numbers like internal commands. Within seconds, a secure frame appeared. No one dared approach. A face appeared on the screen, dark-skinned with salt and pepper-cropped hair, voice firm. "Colonel Carter, confirm the secure line." Evelyn said nothing but raised her military ID, with barcode, The 6-star rank and special investigation insignia were clearly visible under the hospital lights. She did not speak, but quickly typed a summary of the highway incident. Images of her military ID discarded on the ground, videos of her being forced to sign a confession in the hospital, and the body cam footage recovered by Dr. Liam. Each file was encrypted with a brief note. The final line was a direct order. Request Special Military District Investigation. Open Federal Human Rights Violation file. The face on the screen showed no emotion, but nodded and typed to confirmation. The channel closed after a few seconds. Evelyn exhaled lightly and leaned back. Outside, two nurses exchanged disbelieving looks. One whispered, "She just sent something. Looks like an emergency investigation order." The other replied shakily, "From the federal level." From that moment, no one in the hospital saw Evelyn Carter as a patient needing monitoring. She had triggered a silent chain reaction to confront the local system with a profound question: whom had they touched and at what cost? The next morning, unfamiliar faces appeared in the hospital lobby dressed in dark suits with wireless earpieces and black nameplates reading Federal Investigation Liaison. Dodd. They silently instructed staff to grant ICU access. One went to the internal camera control room demanding footage from the past 72 hours. Another delivered a signed order blocking access to Evelyn's patient records. The hospital director received an urgent notice during the morning briefing when he asked for the official decision. An agent presented a red-stamped order. Response Code 7B Federal Investigation Summons protecting military officers classified as civilian infringement victims. Those ordered to temporarily lose file access included the director himself. Meanwhile, at the county police headquarters, phones rang incessantly. An urgent state-level letter was sent by email, fax, and internal portal commanding all investigations related to the highway incident to transfer immediately to an interagency task force. It forbade public statements, amendments to previous reports, and contact with witnesses under treatment. A red printed line declared, "The victim is a senior military officer. The case exceeds local jurisdiction." He started to read it. "The victim is a senior military officer. The case exceeds local jurisdiction." In a second-floor office, James sat stunned before his computer, eyes fixed on the message, throat tight, speechless. Only then did he realize the situation had surpassed anything he had ever imagined could be resolved by apology or justification. He was no longer just a policeman, but a man standing on the border between two power systems where every act was recorded and compared. Outside, an independent media group received a leak from the Federal Internal Reporting Network. The phrase "Colonel shot during routine stop." Classified footage under review began circulating on civil investigation forums. A reporter covering violence against veterans received an encrypted message containing only Evelyn Carter. Highway 19, badge intact. The story leaked uncontrollably beyond mainstream media control. At the state capitol, a secret meeting was convened under Department of Defense sponsorship. State leaders, security advisors, FBI agents, and military district commanders gathered behind soundproof glass. No one spoke initially. The last to enter was a Department of Defense agent holding a thick classified file. Without opening it, he placed it on the table and slowly said, "You fired on the wrong person. The worst part is you want her to stay silent." In that room, no one moved. There was no turning back. The woman, once dismissed as an out-of-service footnote, had become the epicenter of a systemic earthquake. A seemingly silent bullet had opened an unprecedented inquiry into the real limits of power. The room lay deep within the special intensive care unit of the military hospital. Shielded by anti-glare frosted glass, Evelyn was conscious after a week of emergency care, but neurological damage still kept her bedridden. The eye-tracking communication device and touch screen at the bed's edge were her only link to the outside world. The nurses on duty were trained to understand every subtle expression from Evelyn, yet none knew that behind those eyes quietly formed a plan far bigger than mere recovery. Outside, information about the shooting on Route 19 leaked bit by bit. Independent media began speculating about a woman of color in uniform shot by police. Yet local authorities remained silent, refusing to confirm the victim's identity. He delayed either to cover up or to wait for a narrative to be rearranged. Evelyn followed each news update on the small screen in her room, her gaze lingering longest on the passages that were crossed out, edited, then replaced with vague words. Victim, unidentified. One morning, unannounced, a man entered. His coat bore no insignia, his hand held a black leather briefcase, and his eyes showed the seasoned experience of someone no stranger to the battlefield of power. He gave no name, no explanation for his visit. He simply pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table beside the bed. On it was written a single sentence. "Are you willing to fight in another way?" Evelyn met his eyes. She did not nod immediately. Her hand touched the control device, taking a few seconds to type on the screen. "I still wear the uniform." That reply required no further explanation. The man nodded. An unspoken agreement was forged between two who understood what it meant to fight without guns. From that day, the initial information Evelyn provided began flowing into the federal investigation system. The position of police vehicles when headlights shone, the first radio communication signal between Jack and the dispatch station, the period when personal cameras went dark simultaneously. Evelyn described in detail each action, every change in voice tone, how Jack approached, raised his gun, and, the moment her ear was torn, those facts were converted into behavioral maps, cross-referenced with GPS, internal radio waves, and regional traffic cameras. But Evelyn did not stop there. When asked what role she wished to play in the investigation, she typed a line, "I need access to the internal anonymous complaint system." She had taught tactics for analyzing crisis reaction behavior. In her mind, a model map gradually formed. A series of cases with racial elements, body cam malfunctions, repeated false testimonies following the same pattern. She requested stalled reports, civil petitions previously ignored for lack of evidence, and anonymous records from young officers afraid to reveal their identities. She held no weapon, but data was stronger than bullets. Evelyn did not need anyone to call her a victim. She did not require pity. When the agent returned and asked what she wanted to send to the internal investigation before the hearing, she typed clearly on the screen, "I don't want revenge. I want the truth, seen from inside this system." For the first time since being shot, she straightened her back on the bed, not from pain, but because she had begun to return as a warrior in the form of someone once silent, but never bowed. The temporary office of the Federal Investigation Team was located in the secure basement of the military hospital. No nameplates, no signs, but the equipment inside was as advanced and dense, a tactical command room. A data engineer from the Public Oversight Unit was operating the internal behavior monitoring system of the County Police Department. On the screen, hundreds of logs appeared in real time. Moments when body cams were turned off, internal radio signals cut and dispatch, orders sent incorrectly via radio. A linked network map gradually emerged. At the center was Jack Brooke, marked in red. Over the past 2 years, he had turned off his personal recording device 5 times, all during interventions involving people of color. Each time, the final report concluded suspect resisted, but no footage proved it. Internal records showed unusual repetition between Jack's statements, and internal investigations closed within 3 days. An agent quietly took notes beside Evelyn from the hospital room, connected via a secondary screen, watched each line of analysis. Her hand lightly swept the touchscreen, each behavioral chart compiled into a structured chain of violations. Each bright spot on the map represented a person the system had abandoned. Suddenly, the system received an anonymous data package. The sender's identity was hidden, but metadata confirmed it was sent from an internal server of the police department. The attached file contained a recording between Jack and 2 colleagues in which he loudly said, Black people don't have the right to wear the uniform here. If you want to challenge me, just try." The voice, tone, and choice of words all perfectly matched what happened the night Evelyn was shot. James had sent that recording. He did not appear or sign his name, but the act was a first confession. A man still in uniform, but choosing to stand on the right side, even in the shadows. The clip was sent to Evelyn for confirmation. Though deaf, she accurately read the lip movements. Jack's lips, jaw motions, and expressions all perfectly matched. The audio transcript, the agent asked if she could identify whose voice it was. Eileen typed into the device Jack Brooks' statement on "At the scene Route 19. Indirect evidence was upgraded to identifying proof. The first crack appeared inside the system. A young officer from the internal unit requested urgent witness protection. He revealed that records of excessive intervention cases had been edited, timestamps deleted, and cameras blurred. Some videos were cut before the moment guns were drawn. Reports were forced to be signed to avoid division. That same week, the Department of Defense announced the suspension of 5 officers directly involved. The police department fell under special oversight. Those who thought the matter would be buried began to retreat. The system did not collapse overnight, but bricks were crumbling from its foundation. From her hospital room, Evelyn followed the chain of data maps on the screen. Her face showed no obvious emotion. Her eyes remained as sharp as a blade, piercing the most sensitive software of the power mechanism she once believed enviable. At day's end, she opened the text interface, slowly typing one sentence on the screen. "I fought overseas, but this enemy, I must overturn it from within." The cold sealed room had a ceiling light reflecting off Evelyn's sweat-drenched forehead. She had just awakened from surgery, pain throbbing and waves at the back of her neck, but her eyes never left the door. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Then the door cracked open. 2 men entered without name tags or badges, but their eyes revealed contempt as if they were used to ordering the weaker around. One carried a briefcase and silently approached the table, while the other stood near the door in an obvious guard posture. They offered no greetings, nor bothered to confirm identities. The man with the documents pulled out a sheet and slammed it on the table, his voice even and rigid. "Just sign. Don't let a small issue become a media crisis." Evelyn looked at the paper, then stared straight at the man who spoke. She remained silent. Deep inside, she was too familiar with this approach, having witnessed it in war zones where those holding guns believe they are the law. He continued, this time with a sarcastic tone as if bestowing a favor. "The report only repeats what everyone already sees. You resisted when asked to cooperate, used provocative words, and caused the officer to misunderstand that he was threatened. In return, we guarantee you will not be criminally charged. The military will neither revoke your badge nor promote you." Clean, neat, mutually beneficial. Evelyn did not move. Her lips felt dry and raw, but she did not lick them, her hand gripping the hospital sheet tightly. She knew this kind of document well, outwardly conciliatory, but in fact a legal trap, using words to obscure the responsibility of those who fired shots. The man showed impatience, leaning forward with eyes heavy with arrogance. "You don't need to say anything. We can call this voluntary testimony. Whether you sign or not, you lose." Evelyn picked up the paper. Her gaze was calm, but sharper than a blade. She read every line and phrase without blinking. The voice in her head echoed like a steady knocking on the door of patience. Without a word, she lowered the paper onto the bed edge, then slowly pulled the blanket up to her chest with the other hand. She tilted slightly, slipping her hand under the patient's gown. The fabric was icy cold, but beneath it lay the only thing making her feel in control, a tiny recording device planted before surgery. Her finger gently pressed the familiar surface, and a beep sounded, soft as a breath, but clear to those who knew they were about to be exposed. The man by the door cleared his throat as if about to stop something, but stayed still. Neither man knew that from the moment they stepped into that room. Every word, every movement, every pressure they applied was already being recorded. Evelyn leaned back against the pillow, eyes fixed forward as if nothing was happening. She did not need to shout or resist. Her silence was the strategy, and she had just set the trap. Evelyn took the pen they offered, carefully examining the faint text on the paper. Her hands still trembled, but her movement was decisive. The pen lowered, its tip rubbing lightly on the document. The man standing near the table tilted his head toward her with a smug look as if he had sealed the final deal. But instead of signing on the printed line, Evelyn wrote a short sentence. In all capital letters in the margin, illegal assertion to confess is being recorded. Then she put down the pen, raised her head, and stared straight at her counterpart. No threats, no defiance gestures, just a look thick enough to choke the atmosphere. The man frowned, froze for a few seconds, then immediately grabbed the paper back, hastily hiding it inside the file as if trying to erase the revealed trace. He turned to his colleague and signaled. The other man stepped closer to the bed, hand reaching out as if to remove some device, but the door swung open. Liam entered, his white coat still stained with ink spots, face calm, but eyes alert. His voice rang clearly. "I am the attending doctor and a witness to this entire meeting." The newcomer startled and stepped back, hands suspended midair. Evelyn did not look at Liam, but her eyes slowly glanced down at the bedside drawer. A prearranged signal. Liam understood, bent down, and pulled out a small device the size of a finger connected to a specialized USB. He held it up facing the two strangers. "The entire exchange has been recorded," he said, including phrases like "no prosecution" if signed and the contents of the file. "Your faces are clear enough to extract every frame." The lead man gritted his teeth, glancing toward the ceiling camera. Liam followed his gaze and gently asked, "The device up there apparently conveniently malfunctioned today, right?" No one answered, only evasive looks, searching for an escape route. The other's tone softened like a clumsy justification. "We just wanted to clarify a few things. Everything was done in good faith." Liam remained calm, but his tone was heavy with implication. "Then it would be better to let the media and the Department of Defense confirm that so-called good faith." The man hurriedly closed the file and stepped back toward the door, voice dry. "We will return." The words fell into a void, carrying no weight before the eyes of those opposite him. Evelyn reached for the tablet placed on the tray beside the bed. She opened the eye control interface, skillfully operating with each pupil movement. Data from the recording device was transferred to the encrypted interface. A secure connection showed a green confirmation line. A video clip was uploaded to the internal military system. The screen flashed, displaying a successful send notification. Evelyn paused, her eyes void of triumph, but filled with coldness. The last sentence she typed appeared clearly before Liam. "I do not need to hear to know who is trying to silence me." Liam silently stared at the text. Outside in the hallway, footsteps faded, but the most important things had already been engraved, not in minds, but in a system no one could intervene in or erase. The battle was only just beginning, but this time, the first strike would no longer come from the side wearing police uniforms. Evelyn opened her eyes in a half-conscious state, the white light shining down on her face, blurring her vision. Faint shadows moved around the bed. She recognized them as doctors and nurses. Their lips moved silently, some calling her name, others checking her pulse by holding her wrist, but her ears were silent as if a thick glass barrier separated the world from her body. Evelyn watched every gesture and expression without being able to catch any sound. This absolute silence was unlike a dream or hallucination. It was deeper, colder, and more real than the physical pain pressing on her skull. She tried to lift herself and suddenly screamed aloud. Her mouth opened, her throat contracted, but only emptiness slipped between her teeth. Her ears remained empty. She struck the bed rail hard, this time to confirm her own existence. A nurse hurried over, placing a hand on her shoulder as a comforting reflex, but Evelyn's eyes were full of pain. She watched the person's mouth form words, Perhaps calm down. Maybe you are safe. Yet not a single fragment of sound reached her. The feeling of being detached from reality became more distinct. Evelyn lay on her side, curled up like a child abandoned after a storm, leaving the questions in everyone's eyes unanswered. In her mind, the image of the gun flashed again. Jack Brooks' face appeared with a cold gaze. The bullet flew through soft tissue, carrying the last explosion she ever heard. His voice, the judgmental shout, roared like fate. And then everything went silent. She felt tightness in her chest, followed by a stabbing pain in her abdomen, like a choking wave rising from the depths of her mind. Helplessness did not speak through words, but surged in her wide open eyes. Evelyn gripped the edge of the bed, then let go. She had survived battlefields, hostage negotiations, and countless lives threatened. Yet this silence was the thing that destroyed her most deeply. A letter board was brought to her. Another doctor, this time one specializing in rehabilitation, signaled her to try writing. Evelyn nodded slightly. Her fingers stiffened for a moment, then began to move. Each letter appeared on the board like scattered fragments of language. Everything was clumsy, confused, but it was the first step of a comeback. Evelyn did not need pity or consolation. She needed control. Some hospital staff whispered among themselves with evasive glances. She can't hear, right? Is she still aware? Even though those questions were not voiced aloud, Evelyn sensed them in their movements and communications. They thought she knew nothing, heard nothing, and responded to nothing. But she remembered every face, every indifferent gesture. In the afternoon, when the room was free from machine noise, Evelyn sat up and walked to the bathroom by herself. She stood before the mirror, seeing herself for the first time since the incident. Her hair was tangled, her face gaunt, her eyes bloodshot, and her lips cracked, yet her back remained straight. She took a long breath through her nose, and then wrote on the board placed by the sink, "I do not need to hear, I will make them hear me." The mirror reflected the woman in a patient gown, her head covered in fresh wounds, but her eyes remained as before, unbowed like a silent voice. Those words marked the beginning of everything awaiting ahead. Evelyn Carter was no longer the same, and the world would have to change to listen to her voice. Liam appeared as the sun filtered through the frosted glass of a hospital room. He carried a gray cloth bag, stepping lightly as if not wanting to disturb anything. Evelyn leaned back against the bed frame, eyes fixed toward the door, arms folded across her abdomen. Although she could not hear any sound, she knew he was coming. He placed a tablet on the table and activated the assistive interface with his gaze. The screen displayed simple phrases arranged in a familiar grid used in physical therapy. Evelyn's eyes touched the phrases, "Hello, and I am still here." Liam nodded, smiled, then spoke clearly through lip movements. She followed each movement of his lips, learning to read language by image. At first, both were awkward. Forming a question took several seconds, and an answer sometimes had to be repeated several times with facial expressions. But gradually, the distance faded. Evelyn slowly typed, "Why did you bring this device to me?" Liam did not avoid the question. He sat down, exhaled deeply before answering in a calm, steady voice, "I once had a little sister. She died at 16, shot by police while waiting at a bus stop near a white neighborhood." He paused, his eyes flickering as if confronting a haunting memory. Evelyn froze. The next phrase she intended to write was erased midway. In her eyes was an unspoken understanding. She typed again. "So, you know I am not an exception." Liam nodded, moving slightly but decisively. They began exchanging the fragments they each had gathered. Liam spoke about camera data he secretly backed up from the hospital system, unusual extracts from duty logs, and suspicious signal loss times from internal servers. Evelyn flipped to another interface, selecting classified files from the Department of Defense that she still had access to documents proving that the shooting violated civilian firearm control regulation. During the exchange, Lee mentioned an invitation from the city police department. Someone in the media proposed that he appear in an interview to reassure the public about the role of a treating physician. They wanted him to emphasize that Evelyn was receiving dedicated care and that everything was being handled internally. He refused. "I know exactly what happened in that hospital room. I am not going on television to whitewash them." Evelyn did not smile, but her eyes softened. She typed the final sentence of that conversation, the phrase appearing letter by letter. "How far are you willing to go?" Liam did not answer in words. He opened his bag, pulled out a black leather-covered hard drive labeled with bold numbers and special encryption codes. He placed it in Evelyn's palm, then sat back beside her without saying more. The room fell silent, but was not empty. Between the two of them, there was no oath or explicit pact, but Evelyn knew that from that moment they stood together. An alliance was formed, needing no declaration, just existence. And in that silence, the battle lines began to emerge clearer than ever before. The news of Jack Brooke disappearing from the city spread like wildfire through dry grass. That morning, the head of Internal Affairs, Inspector, passed by Jack's office and saw an empty chair, scattered files, and the personal belongings cabinet locked from the inside. There was no letter left behind, no message, and his last log into the system appeared at dawn, exactly at the shift change. James heard the news while being called in for a meeting with the temporary disciplinary board. Inside the room, no one mentioned Jack, but everyone's eyes seemed to silently place him in the seat of accusation. James sat still, eyes lowered to the edge of the table, his forehead sweating. As he walked out, an older officer muttered too, "A colleague, only the young don't know when to stop and end up left behind like this." In the following days, the name Jack Brooke began appearing in internal reports, a shadow, an employee under surveillance, possibly involved in procedural violations requiring cooperation for investigation. Yet, no one could find him at his usual contacts. His phone went silent and his bank card stopped working since Monday morning. Through airport security cameras, a man wearing a hood and using false identification under the name Daniel Shaw was seen boarding an international flight from Detroit to Frankfurt. The blurry footage was enough for the verification team to confirm that the facial features matched. At the State Department of Justice, a special task force was assigned specifically to handle Jack's case. Evelyn received an intelligence summary via internal channels along with a message from investigators. "We need technical support and help decrypting internal police files." She forwarded the data to Liam, who was working with an independent legal team. The hard drive he had handed over earlier contained more data related to the hospital incident, including encrypted audio recordings from the external surveillance camera system. Among them was a clip where Jack once told a close colleague, "That place will be exposed sooner or later. I'm not waiting to be dragged out of the car." His tone was not exactly fearful, but sounded weary of living on edge within a system accustomed to hiding crimes under the table. Evelyn reread the transcript converted from audio, gripping the screen frame tightly. She knew people like Jack well, no ideals, no loyalty, living only in the dark space between law and reality. At the same time, James was repeatedly summoned. The recurring questions buried him deeper in shame. Who ordered the gun to be drawn? Did you recognize the subject as a service member? Why was there no verbal warning before firing? Each answer pushed James further into a point of no return. The truth was he did not draw the gun, but he also did not stop the one who did. And Evelyn, the woman his wife had mentioned, with admiration in her eyes, now had to live in a completely silent world. Evelyn did not meet with James. She sent no letter nor demanded discipline. But that silence became the burden that robbed James of sleep for many nights. He began digging through shift records, tracing video footage himself, personally, calling the camera control unit, demanding checks on signal loss matching the times, everything he had never dared touch before. In a temporary office on the other side of the hospital, Liam and the technical team recovered data from the old police headquarters server. A strange file was discovered, a folder containing shift rotation logs, times of internal calls, and task distribution that did not match reports sent to the state level. A chain of misassigned permissions between the central command and the task force server enough to launch an official investigation. Among the extracted recordings was a dialogue between Jack and a low-level officer. Jack asked, "Are you sure she hasn't noticed the missing segments?" The reply was, "I told you the hospital system's audio data was cut off. We just need to clean up the video." The question continued, "What about the ceiling camera in her room?" The answer, "Disabled already. But that doctor, he doesn't seem easily controlled." Evelyn listened to the transcript through the voice synthesis device attached to the communication tool. She looked at Liam silently, but her eyes noticeably grew colder. She typed on the screen, "We are not just chasing one person. We are peeling back the layers of an entire system." In mid-June, the Federal Department of Justice issued an international arrest warrant for Jack Brooke, accusing him of abuse of power and seriously harming a protected witness. This news appeared on national television channels, showing for the first time Evelyn's official image in a clip capturing the moment she refused to sign a confession. No sound was needed. Her eyes alone conveyed that this story had transcended the borders of a personal mistake. James sat alone in the empty police meeting room with a letter of resignation from the task force before him. He had not signed it. Yet, the question kept repeating in his mind. Resigned to avoid involvement or stay to prove he was not like the others. That afternoon, he went to the hospital and stood outside Evelyn's room without knocking. She was reading documents, her head slightly tilted, her expression strangely calm. He left quietly, knowing some mistakes could not be undone with apologies. Yet from that day on, James enrolled in mandatory retraining classes for officers with histories related to violent incidents. He was not standing up to prove he was right, but to prove he could learn again from scratch. As for Evelyn, in her latest update to the Federal Investigative Team, she sent a single line in her report. "No one stays missing in the shadows forever. If he knows how to hide, I know how to track." That response was not a threat, it was a promise. And Evelyn Carter, though deaf now, had never once broken a promise. The technical room was located on the third floor of an isolated military facility where the Army's electronic data recovery team regularly worked with damaged drives, expired encryption devices, and deliberately erased fragments of digital memory. Liam stood before a large wall-mount screen, his eyes following each line of code, automatically reconstructing segments from the body cam footage obtained during an internal inspection. The original files appeared only as encrypted data strings, without sound or image, but after continuous days of relentless work, the special software developed by his team began to piece together audio separated from the video signals. On the screen, a video appeared, footage from a camera mounted on a mid-ranking officer's body taken near checkpoint 17 on a suburban road. In the recording, a voice sounded through the internal radio, dry like an administrative order. Black. Subject, luxury vehicle. Sensitive area. Level 3 processing. Prepare a brief countermeasure. This order was not recorded in any official report. The phrase Level 3 processing caused Liam to pause. He pulled up a chair and sat down, opening a folder that separated all dispatch orders from the command center over the past 3 months. Among hundreds of encoded waveform conversations, there were at least 4 with overlapping content, all using the terms Level 3 processing or Intervention Level 2. After tracing the data, the system displayed an internal classification chart with 6 behavioral levels applied to uncertain situations. The notes column clearly stated preliminary classification based on behavior characteristics, race, administrative, region. Liam was silent for several minutes before opening the second video, this time from the camera attached to Officer James' shirt during a routine patrol before the Evelyn incident. A clear dialogue appeared. White subject, uncooperative. Behavior, ignore processing level. Let the local police adjust. Another clip. From the night Jack led a team controlling vehicles past curfew. Asian female subject speaking local accent. Another voice replied, downgrade to level 1. No need to stop the vehicle. The classification proceeded smoothly like an algorithm. No one reacted. No one questioned. Liam ran all the data through a comparison interface. The results showed that the internal processing system was built on 3 factors: ethnicity, movement patterns, and degree of access to areas considered security control priorities. Those who fell into the combination of black after-hours movement, new vehicle were automatically escalated to level 3 processing. This meant they could be required to stop immediately, have their personal belongings inspected, or, in certain cases, be forcibly subdued if there was any sign of resistance. Evelyn sat opposite Liam as he presented the first decoded report. On the tablet screen, each line appeared in rhythm with his typing. She watched without blinking, her jaw tightening noticeably. When finished, she wrote briefly, "I suspected this, but this is systemic-level evidence." Liam nodded. He had never imagined that the daily radio orders, considered mere technical dispatches, were encoded with such a sophisticated racial bias system that was untraceable in textual records. At the end of the session, Evelyn requested a full copy of the files transferred to a Level 2 security drive and simultaneously sent to the Defense Department's investigation team. But before closing the data, she paused on a longer segment. Slightly distorted images with Jack's voice heard. Level 6 now. Don't hesitate. Black Armed Forces unknown plates. No stop means losing the trail. Accompanying this were sounds of weapons being loaded and engines accelerate. This segment had never been released. It occurred 3 days before the shooting at Evelyn. After the meeting, Liam was pulled aside by a young female officer from the technology team. She handed him a separate file containing dialogues marked excluded, not part of the police unit's public data. It included many private conversations between Jack and coordinators. Not operational, but personal exchanges, prejudices, and even mockery about the patrol subjects. One phrase stunned Liam: the more medals they have, the sooner they must be taken down. Less chance of them rising up to lecture others later. This statement hit the dark core Evelyn had described: organized hatred cloaked in official duty. From these recordings, Liam and his team mapped behavioral traces, statistics of intervention requests by skin color, frequency of property checks, and average detainment time by residence area. The results chilled the spine. Black people were checked 4 times more than white people despite similar vehicle counts. The outcome: the heaviest burden was that only 12% of cases detected actual offenses. Most checks were based on suspicion. Evelyn did not rush to make this public. She knew timing was crucial. Instead, she contacted a neutral legal group to independently verify the data's authenticity before submission. She wanted everything to be rock solid before releasing it to the public. James was invited to a closed meeting. There he watched clips showing himself moments he thought nothing had happened. He stood silently before footage of himself walking past a detained black man by the roadside without questioning, intervening, or suspecting anything. He had been part of that system unknowingly. At the end of the day, Liam left Evelyn a printed report along with the data storage disk. She placed it on her lap, eyes looking out the technical room window. The late afternoon sun poured over distant tiled roofs, long streaks like cracks. Evelyn said nothing, but she knew those recordings had changed the nature of the case. From a singular shooting incident, everything now flipped into an indictment of the entire system. And once these videos were circulated, no one could claim ignorance anymore. The Capitol building that morning was not as noisy as usual. Footsteps were slow, gazes pulled back behind frosted glass, as if everyone recognized that today was not merely a hearing. The audience seats were full, many, having protested in the early days, now sitting neatly with notebooks or recording devices, waiting for something that would shake not just a department, but the entire judicial system. Later, he'd sit. Evelyn Carter stepped up to the tall, wooden podium, wearing no uniform and showing no forced expression. Her hair was neatly cut, hands gripped tightly the printed statement on white paper. The ceiling lights reflected off her face, casting just enough light for anyone to see the seriousness in her stance. She looked straight ahead at the committee members watching her. No one urged her. No one asked. All remained silent, waiting for the first voice to sound, but it did not come from her mouth. A sound device was placed before the microphone connected to Evelyn's voice files from previous training sessions. A technician checked one last time, then pressed play. Honorable members of Congress, I am Evelyn Carter, a colonel in the United States Army. I have led many special operations units, carrying out missions overseas to protect national security, sometimes with my own blood. But today, I am here not to recount victories, but to ask you a question. Who will protect us when the shooter wears a badge? The voice played slowly, a deep female tone, clear and steady, neither trembling nor defense. The chamber remained so silent that the scratching of a secretary's pen was audible. I was stopped while returning home after a hostage rescue mission. No violation, no warning, only prejudice. I was ordered out of the car, hands on my head, though no one had verified my identity or circumstances. I complied not because I was afraid, but because I believed in procedure. I believed until the bullet tore through my hearing. Evelyn did not look down at the paper. Her eyes remained fixed forward. For a brief moment, light shimmered at the corner of her eyes, but no one knew if it was a tear or just the refraction of light. After that, I heard in a different way. I heard through the silence of those who saw me fall, but looked away. I heard in every bowed head of those who thought I was too strong to fall, yet too weak to resist. An elderly congressman leaned slightly, folding his hands before his chest. Another, younger, wearing a pin symbolizing military families, placed his hand on his forehead, bowing slightly. Whether I wore the uniform or not should not be the reason for being treated with dignity. I am a citizen. I pay taxes. I fulfill my duties. But I was shot, not because I did wrong, but because my skin color made someone feel entitled to not listen to me. She paused at the exact moment the voice reached the last line of the passage. The silence seemed to stretch across the room. The soft sound of a page turning came from the hearing table. No procedure allows an officer to shoot a person who is unarmed, non-threatening, and cooperating. No document permits degrading dignity, then fabricating reasons to protect the institution's reputation. But it is these gaps in the system that made this happen, repeat itself, and become legitimized. She turned to the second page of the statement. The device kept running. We live in a country where laws are good, but enforcement depends on the will of the one holding the gun. When a uniform is ignored, a person erased, the question is no longer who is wrong, but what truth are we letting die a little each day? There was a light sigh from the back of the hall. A young female congresswoman raised her hand to request to speak after the session. Yet all eyes remained fixed on the continuing void. People say I was lucky to survive. I think differently. Survival is not luck. It is responsibility. The responsibility to speak out when the voice was once silenced by a bullet. The responsibility to prove justice should not be emotional, much less based on skin color. Evelyn took a deep breath. No one heard it, but those nearby could sense it from the movement of her shoulders and the brief falter in her gaze. A bead of sweat ran down her neck. She did not wipe it away. At this moment, I no longer hear gunshots, sirens, applause, or protests. But I still feel clearly one thing. This silence must be broken. Not by shouting, but by law enforced correctly. Right does not exist by itself. It must be protected by action. A technician raised a hand, and signaling 3 minutes left, but the testimony had reached its conclusion. I do not ask for pity. I demand change. If a colonel in the Army is still underestimated enough to be shot without question, then imagine what will happen to a newly graduated young man, a single mother, or an African-American child in a poor neighborhood. Evelyn folded the paper. The voice echoed one last time from the device. Do not let bullets be used as tools of silence. Let us live in a country where voices, whether quiet, weak, or from someone who can no longer hear, can still bring change. The end. 1 second, 2 seconds, then 3. Still no one spoke, but the first hand slapped on the table, followed by another clap, and then another. Not all, but enough to create a sound that stretched from the chamber to the hallway. Evelyn left the podium, walking straight, eyes not avoiding anyone. She did not look back. She did not need to. She knew that once they listened, this battle had already begun to echo. Evelyn's hearing had triggered an extraordinary upheaval at the Franklin County Police headquarters for days later. The glass doors were plastered with printed slogans concealing empty desks, strip badges, and bowed heads in front of screens displaying federal summons. A black government SUV parked outside and 3 suited FBI agents carrying thick files entered directly to the data room. Holding unexamined internal documents, that afternoon, Police Chief Dennis Ray resigned quietly without explanation and left hastily through a back exit. 17 officers, including high-ranking deputies and captains, were suspended in connection with unlawful searches and misconduct over 6 years. At a security oversight emergency meeting, a senior official stated that this was not an isolated mistake, but a deliberate system of protecting abuse. The FBI announced that its investigation uncovered systematic abuses, including excessive force, racial profiling, and internal record manipulation aimed at population control. At the hospital, Liam sat beside Evelyn as news footage showed officers surrendering badges with vacant eyes. Evelyn, unable to hear, wrote, "I do not feel satisfaction, but at least there is noise in this silence." The Federal Department of Justice took over the county police, placing headquarters under special oversight and dispatching task forces to confiscate weapons and devices statewide for inspection. A local editorial declared that systems must listen for people to speak, warning that the real danger lies in tolerated systemic violence. James Donovan publicly confessed to the press his prior silence that enabled the system's failings. Behind him, a yellow ribbon commemorated Evelyn's heroic rescue. Former officers petitioned Congress for comprehensive law enforcement reform, citing Evelyn's testimony on trust over fear. FBI internal footage showed Jack Brooke verbally abusing Evelyn with racial slurs, while James stood by without intervening, influenced by unclear command structures. A detailed report concluded this was systemic, not isolated. The State Reform Committee approved 5 key measures: banning shootings of unarmed suspects, mandating transparent training records, prosecuting falsified reports, tracking investigations, finances, and establishing an independent oversight council. Evelyn read the news silently at the hospital. Her notebook inscribed, "No one needs to return my hearing. I need only that others do not lose more." The Justice Minister sent a card thanking her for forcing systemic change, though unable to hear the world around her. Evelyn felt that today's collapse marked not an end, but the beginning of rebuilding on a foundation beyond silence. Evelyn sat silently in the therapy room, the afternoon light slanting through the glass window, casting a faint glow on the white wall. Her hand rested on her lap, an open notebook before her with the pen paused mid-layer. Her eyes no longer focused on the page, but lingered on some indefinite space beyond the window, where the tree branches swayed, as if still producing sounds she could no longer perceive. She had once believed herself strong and truly had overcome challenges beyond what ordinary people could imagine. Yet, among all the battles, both on the battlefield and within the system, Evelyn had never faced something no training could prepare her for: absolute silence, prolonged, swallowing every sound she once regarded as a signal for survival. No sirens, no calls, no hurried footsteps, no heartbeat in a breathless moment. Everything retreated, giving way to the cold emptiness. Medicine calls permanent nerve damage. The doctor had been clear. The auditory nerves were completely destroyed, no chance of recovery. Evelyn nodded without questioning. She understood this as nothing less than a sentence, not because she needed to hear to live, but because she once lived by sensing everything through every sound beat. That was how she read the battlefield, heard the fear in the enemy's voice, recognized a threat even when unseen. From now on, she lost that sense, and that loss left a void no wound could match. William entered holding two paper coffee cups. He set one down on the table, then sat beside her silently. He knew she would look at him when ready, and only then could he speak. Evelyn raised her head, her eyes empty, but the strained corner of her mouth made him nod slightly. She wrote in her notebook, "Do you think someone who lost hearing is no longer fit to lead?" Liam took the pen from her hand and wrote below, "I think people do not need to hear if they make others listen." Evelyn stared at the words, then gently placed her hand on her chest, right where the bullet had grazed her armor years ago, closest to the heart. It had been a long time since she felt such emotion rising defenselessly. Liam did not comfort or console. He simply told her about a deaf boy he once treated, who learned sign language as a soft weapon and later became a lawyer defending disability rights across the state. Evelyn listened through his eyes and hand movements, feeling each story as if it were translated directly into her blood. She suddenly stood up and walked to the mirror. She pulled her hair back, revealing the right ear with a faint scar where the bullet passed through. She looked straight into the mirror, then wrote again in her notebook, "I faced death, but never thought living would bring even more layered challenges." Liam rewrote, "Because survival is always the longest chapter of any war." Evelyn smiled, this time a genuine one. She placed her hand on the table and reopened the documents she had been reviewing. They were profiles of police training camps statewide where the new reform program was about to be implemented. She was invited as an advisor. Every line in the file listed people who once wore the same uniform as the man who pulled the trigger on her. She read slowly, underlined ethical practice failures, and marked substandard training metric. It was tedious work, but for her it was like redesigning a foundation from rubble. That evening, when she returned to her room, she spent an hour practicing pronunciation by looking in the mirror. Although she could not hear the sound she made, she still remembered the tone of each command from when she led her unit. Her tongue was stiff, her lips trembled, but her gaze sharpened. She repeated a single sentence over and over. "Listening is not a privilege, it is a responsibility." The next morning, Liam gave her a device, a tactile vibration machine that tracked sound vibrations. Placed under her palm, it could help detect loud or unusual noises within a 3 meters radius. Evelyn touched the device and then played an old video showing officers conducting a faulty inspection procedure. Each time a shout rang out, her palm vibrated softly. She could not hear, but she knew where intervention was needed. In the following days, Evelyn joined video training sessions with the ethics program development team. She spoke little, typing on an electronic board, then looking directly at each person. They spoke less, but took more notes. No one dared underestimate those eyes, even without accompanying words. On the weekend, a meeting was held with veteran organizations. Evelyn entered the hall. Everyone stood to greet her silently. On the table was a row of seats with a nameplate in the middle. Special Advisor Evelyn Carter. She did not sit immediately. She walked to the podium, placed her hand on the microphone. No sound. She said nothing, just raised her hand, opened her notebook, wrote a few words, then faced the live camera. "This is the first time I speak without raising my voice, but I believe you will understand me better than ever before." That photo quickly spread on social media. She stood there holding up a sheet with handwritten blue ink letters, her face calm. Below the photo, a status was shared hundreds of thousands of times. She no longer needs to hear, because now the whole country is listening to her. That night, when Evelyn returned to her room, she turned off all the lights, sat by the window, Watching the shadows of trees stretch on the street, she wrote the last line in her notebook before closing it. Not all wounds can heal, but there are those who live through them. I am one of them. The state legislative building that morning was no livelier than usual, yet one could clearly sense a silent shift underway. The media lined up neatly on both sides of the stone steps, holding cameras, microphones, and recording devices already aimed at the chamber where a law had just been passed with near unanimous consensus. From that fall onward, every police officer in the state would be required to undergo mandatory retraining for 6 months if they wished to continue being licensed to carry firearms and conduct field operations. The curriculum did not focus on tactics or combat skills. Instead, the new courses carried a different title: Controlling Emotional Reactions in a Multicultural Environment, Nonviolent Communication with Unarmed Subjects, Law Enforcement Ethics, and the Legal Limits on the Use of Force. People called it a soft reform, but no one denied the firmness behind it. James Donovan read the announcement from the State Department of Justice on his phone screen, his finger quietly scrolling through each clause. Every sentence served as a warning he had applied on the very first morning the system opened. Although his superiors did not require it, and no official verdict had found him at fault. In Evelyn's case, he understood that continuing in the force without retraining would make the badge on his chest nothing more than a soulless piece of meat. The first class took place at a training center on the city outskirts. James arrived early and stepped into a large room filled with gray plastic chairs. Above hung an electronic board, scrolling the phrase, "Welcome officers to a new beginning." He recognized several familiar faces. Some had worn the same uniform during weekend patrol shifts. Others had stood in the county's rapid response team. No one spoke loudly. No one joked as before. The atmosphere allowed none of that. The class began with a short video showing the moment a middle-aged man was restrained because he removed his hands from the steering wheel when asked to comply. The video was recorded by his son sitting in the back seat, who screamed in panic as he saw his father pressed face down against the car's hood. The man did not survive. The police officers in the video were still on duty. "We are not here to blame anyone," the instructor, a former federal prosecutor, said with a hoarse voice. "We are here to learn how not to become the next person in that video." The class was far from comfortable. For hours, trainees had to participate in realistic scenario simulations. Surveillance cameras recorded every glance, every choice, every reflex. Sometimes they had to play the role of the main suspect. Other times, they were tasked to resolve disputes between two civilians by any means except violence. James was once unsettled when an elderly woman suddenly burst into tears, calling him the one wearing the shoes of the man who once beat my son. The actress played the role too well, or perhaps the woman had truly lived through it. In another session, they were asked to rewrite an arrest report using neutral language devoid of emotion. The instructor explained, "If your report makes the reader unable to distinguish who is the arrestee and who is the officer, then that is a proper report." James bit his lip while writing. In his mind appeared the image of Evelyn lying on the ground, blood spreading from her ear, her gaze not pleading but full of disappointment. For the first time in his life, he felt lost before a silent person who seemed to know exactly what the whole world was thinking. In the fourth week, they began studying the theory of delayed reaction, pausing for a few seconds to assess before acting. Many lives were lost because you acted faster than your own emotions, the instructor said while replaying the clip of police firing within the first 6 seconds. James returned home late one evening without turning on the lights. The apartment was silent except for the steady breathing of his wife in the next room where their newborn child slept peacefully. Emily had once looked at him for a long time without blame or encouragement. She had known Evelyn even before he did, and he was the one who had drawn his gun on her. At the course's end, each trainee had to stand before the class and recount a professional situation they regretted. James was the 17th. He stepped forward, voice steady, eyes staring into space. I once thought I was right following procedure. I was trained to prioritize safety above all else. But I was never taught how to distinguish real danger from people who deserve to be treated as human beings. The class fell silent. I once raised my gun on a woman I did not understand. She saved my wife. I will never have a big enough chance to apologize for that. But I am here to learn how to live without repeating the same mistake. A classmate gently patted his back as he returned to his seat. It was the first time since the course began that James received a touch free of judgment. A few days later, the graduation list was posted in the hallway. James' name ranked among the top. He did not call the police station to share the news. Instead, he messaged his wife a line, "I think I can start over." That evening, he stood before the mirror, took the badge out of his shirt pocket, and placed it on the table. For the first time in a long while, he looked directly into his own eyes. Not because he had never done wrong, but because finally he dared to admit he had not been right enough. James stood before the door of the senior trainer's building, which had just been converted from the old Rapid Response Center of the State Police. On the new sign, still smelling of paint, the name of the Law Enforcement Reform Center quietly sat beneath a silver shield emblem, no longer bearing the image of a gun as before. He took a deep breath, gripping tightly an old file folder that still contained a handwritten letter from his wife dated last month. One single line read, "If you still believe in justice, become a part of it." This time the right way. He did not rush inside. The early season sunlight shone on the road, still damp with dew. Every step today was an affirmation. James had not left the force, though he could have and had reason to do so. But on a night full of inner turmoil, seeing his firstborn sleeping peacefully on his wife's chest, he realized that leaving was not a way to make things right. It was an escape. The police department, where he once worked, had changed. Former superiors were reassigned, and half of the personnel were required to retrain. The public no longer looked at patrol officers with fear in their eyes. They observed more closely, questioned more. Strangely, James felt no discomfort. He began to understand the feeling Evelyn had once described while still in the hospital. Trust does not come from the badge, but from how you see people as human beings. He met with the training coordinator to volunteer as an assistant instructor for the Safe Communication Practice Program for new officers. The coordinator looked at him for a long time before nodding. Not everyone with a background tied to a statewide shocking incident would return hoping to contribute to reform, but James's eyes when speaking of Evelyn held something unmistakable, remorse down to his bones. In his first class teaching, the new officers sitting before him were young, some people of color, including women. James spoke little, but each sentence was clear. He told a true unnamed story about an officer who once failed to ask questions before drawing his weapon. He did not reveal his identity or who was injured, only letting them analyze right and wrong from the actions. The class was silent. One trainee asked, "So, was that officer ultimately fired?" James looked straight ahead. He voluntarily started over because he did not want anyone else to live with the silence he caused. A week later, he received an invitation letter from the military, a civilian training organization working with federal forces wanted him to participate as a speaker, sharing his experience on career reshaping after a crisis. The letter was signed by no one other than Evelyn Carter. The last time James saw Evelyn was in the hospital when she still lay in a white bed among machines. That day, he stood outside for a long time, hands trembling, unsure whether from shame or fear. Now he stood before another door, a door opening to a person still alive, but no longer able to hear anyone's voice. He arrived at the Military Rehabilitation Center late in the afternoon as light began to slant against the glass walls. Evelyn sat alone in the reading room, not looking outside, but seemingly already knowing who was coming. When James entered, she did not look up, only turned another page. No greeting. He placed a small box on the table containing a printed report of the class he had taught along with the reform report from the department he once served. Evelyn flipped through it, tapping the edge of a page rhythmically. Each tap was a silence. After a moment, she wrote on the touch board, "Why didn't you quit?" James read the words and answered, "Because if I leave, people will say what happened to you was random, but if I stay, it becomes a lesson." She wrote again, "Are you afraid?" He nodded, then whispered just loud enough for himself to hear, "I fear myself the most." For a moment, Evelyn smirked. For the first time during their meeting, her face relaxed, no longer heavy like a survivor, but like someone living with purpose. She took out her phone and replayed the video from the congressional hearing. The AI-generated voice mimicking her old voice rang out. "I don't need a voice to make people listen." James listened again, this time without blinking. "Do you think you will come back?" he asked. She wrote, "I don't need to come back. I am exactly where I belong." In the room hung a simple picture showing a military badge and a police badge side by side, not to compare, but to remind. Evelyn stood up, signaling James to follow. They walked down the long hallway leading to the soft skills training area for rapid response officers. Inside, a group of young people were learning how to use body language to reduce tension in communication. James saw their faces. No one knew who he was, and he felt light. When leaving, Evelyn wrote the last line on the electronic board, "Don't let anyone like me fall again." James looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "I promise." They did not shake hands, did not hug. No ceremony needed? But in a place without sound, the promise was recorded clearly, like the gunshots that once rang out, now transformed into echoes of atonement and rebirth. On the first day, Evelyn Carter stepped onto the stage at the National Conference on Law Enforcement Reform. No one heard her voice. Yet, the room of several hundred people fell completely silent. On the large screen behind her, every word appeared exactly at the typing speed from a specially programmed wrist device. She stood straight, shoulders bearing old insignia, but no longer in uniform. She did not represent any unit. She represented the consequence. Whenever the word survival appeared, people exchanged looks full of unhidden emotion. There were old police chiefs sitting in the front rows, their hair white, eyes moist but never lowered. There were rookies who had just finished training, gripping their thighs tightly, trying to maintain calm expressions. All were there for one shared reason. They did not want to be part of the old ways, nor face someone like Evelyn again without knowing what to say. After that conference, Evelyn was elected honorary director of a civilian organization named the Carter Initiative. This organization was independent of any police or military agency. It was self-funded but cooperated with many law enforcement nationwide. Its sole mission was to build a retraining model based on real experience, not on textbooks or dry laws. The first office was established in Atlanta, a place that had seen numerous civil lawsuits related to abuse of power. Evelyn demanded the construction of a real response training room based on the slow reflex model she had proposed during the hearings. Trainees were not stuffed with theory. They had to enter real situations, meet real people who had been victims or witnesses. Some cried on the first day, some dropped out. But the recidivism rate of officers after completing the program dropped significantly. That number required no announcement. It spoke for itself. Evelyn spoke little. Every day she arrived at the office at 8 a.m., checked progress reports, and monitored feedback from each regional center. She once demanded that the entire simulation content be changed at a branch after discovering trainees still used prejudiced language in situation analysis. When asked how she knew, Evelyn only showed the questioner a hidden camera in her training badge. She never stopped observing. Liam, the doctor who had saved her life, later became the co-founder of the organization. He no longer worked in medical care, but was responsible for psychological support and trauma response for trainees who had problems during their duty. Every week he attended the entrance and self-limitation class where Evelyn had silently observed many times without anyone knowing. 3 years after the shooting, a small memorial park was built at the intersection where Evelyn had been shot. There was no bronze statue, no portrait, only an archipelago stone carved with the words, "The woman was shot not because she held a gun, but because they thought she could become a threat, and she became a threat to the entire system." Below was Evelyn's signature carved from her own handwriting before she lost her hearing. The inauguration ceremony took place on a light rainy afternoon. People came to lay flowers. A group of high school students loudly read the passage on the memorial stone. Emily Donovan, the woman Evelyn had once saved, stood silently at the edge, holding her 3-year-old child. James stood a few steps away, out of uniform, wearing only a dark shirt. When the MC asked if anyone wanted to speak, James stepped forward and took a small piece of paper from his shirt pocket. "That day I was on the wrong side," he said. "I was facing the crowd. I once thought a uniform was enough for me to do right. But then I met someone who didn't have to say anything, yet made me realize I had never deserved it." A burst of applause followed. Evelyn was not present that day. She was in Seattle meeting academy leaders to make behavior assessment systems mandatory before issuing police certificates. When sent the video clip, she only nodded slightly. In the 5th year since the bullet passed through her left ear, a bill named the Carter Reform Act was officially passed at the federal level. It required all law enforcement in the United States to integrate emotional education, reflex control, and racial equality behavior programs. The law also mandated expanding the individual evaluation system every 6 months based on public feedback, not just internal supervisors. On the day the bill was signed, the sitting U.S. president stated, "We often imagine heroes as those who know how to fight. But sometimes heroes are those who know how to endure and turn their losses into a protective system for others." Evelyn sat in the front row alone. She needed no one beside her to be memorable. The large screen behind displayed a clip from her organization's first training session. A young officer bowed to thank her after she guided him again on how to approach a psychologically unstable subject. He said, "I used to think justice was a weapon. Now I think it is a limit." The ceremony ended. Evelyn did not stay for photos. She walked toward the back door where her car waited. On the way back to the office, she typed a message sent to the entire training system. "Don't let our program become an obligation. Let it be something everyone chooses to do right." She could not hear the sounds around her, but felt the country shifting. A shift that was quiet without protests or slogans. It began with those who once did not know they were wrong, learning to apologize and act differently. No one built a statue for Evelyn Carter, but everyone was grateful she was still alive and she was still living in a way no one could have expected. Colonel Evelyn Carter's story is just a personal tragedy. It's a powerful reminder of how society too often judges people by the color of their skin, their gender, or what they appear to be on the surface. Evelyn was a high-ranking military officer who had saved countless lives. Yet standing on that highway, she was seen as a threat simply because she was a black woman. In a moment that called for calm and fairness, prejudice pulled the trigger before reason had a chance to speak. This story shows us something vital. Dignity and strength aren't defined by how people see you. They're revealed in how you carry yourself when you've been misjudged. Evelyn didn't shout to prove her worth. She stood her ground in silence. And that silence roared louder than any protest. When they tried to silence her with violence, she answered with truth, and when they tried to cover it up, she made sure the entire system had no choice but to listen. Justice may come late, but it doesn't sleep. People like Evelyn, brave, disciplined, and unwilling to back down, prove that one person, armed with truth and patience, can change the course of everything. This isn't a story about anger. It's a story about awareness, about the courage to stay upright when everything around you says, "Step down," about the strength to answer violence with dignity, Have you ever been misjudged simply because someone didn't understand who you really are? Have you ever been underestimated only to quietly prove you are far more capable than they imagined? If Evelyn's story made you stop and think, share it. Someone out there may be going through the same feeling of being dismissed or looked down upon, and they need to know they're not alone. They need to know that people have been through it, survived it, and come back stronger. We believe justice doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts in how we see one another, in how we stop judging and start listening. Thank you for staying until the end. We are committed to bringing you more stories that inspire, expose the truth, and give voice to those who refuse to be erased. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful and meaningful content, because every person has a story worth being heard.